To our budget and facilities meeting. We're very excited because, I'm very excited because we have our state aid runs and we have some real numbers to talk about, and we get to do a bit of a deeper dive on our rollover budget, etc. I know we do have an old business issue, but if the committee does not mind, I'd like to do our presentation first and then go into the old business conversation. You guys okay with that?
Yeah.
Super. I will just say from a standpoint of an overall queuing up of the conversation, we as a school district, as well as other school districts within the state of New York, found that the state aid runs were favorable, but could, and we're very appreciative of all of that. However, in the area of foundation aid, while we appreciate our 1% increase, we do hope that the governor and everyone else has a little bit of wiggle room so that we can negotiate a little bit higher. There were some increases to universal pre-K, and I know Kathy's going to go into a lot of this, but I also just wanted to talk about the fact that in some of the conversations that are had, there are still some anticipated funds that they feel that the state can work with to grant more funding, whether it's for state aid, or foundation aid, or whether it's for UPK or other instances. So as with everything, it is a draft. Some of the other items that we can talk about really quickly are on the federal side. So for those of you that saw, the federal legislation passed both in the House and the Senate. Basically, Title I and IDEA got a $20 million increase, but although that sounds like a lot of money, it really leaves us very flat as Title I funds are concerned in IDEA, and as well as they did not cut Title II or Title III, which is one of the things that we were concerned about. And I'm going to go back now to the state side. The only thing that I think outside of the financial aspect that some people have been a little bit disappointed on were that there was really no further discussion in great detail about the zero emission buses. That 2027 date is still there. However, now the waiver is up and online for schools to fill out to apply for it. That will give you a waiver to probably 2029. So I'm sure we'll be looking into something like that and filling that out. The good news is we don't have to do anything until after July 1st because nobody's going to look at it till after that, said New York State Ed. So fantastic for us. We have a little time on that. Other than that, do you guys have anything else that you'd like to add from an overall update that I might have missed?
Nope.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kathy, and we have the rollover budget first. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Good morning, everybody. So we are going to do kind of tomorrow at the board meeting, we will be talking about the rollover budget as well, but at more of a higher level perspective. So I wanted to take you through the rollover budget discussion for 26-27, and if there's any questions that you want to talk a little more about. So as always, the portrait of a graduate is really the North Star of our school district. That guides all of our decisions for budgets and any kind of financial decisions that we make. How is it going to affect our students? This year, our priorities are creating a culture of care, belonging and well-being, academic and personal excellence, and future-ready facilities. We continue to look at long-range plans for our educational programs. We want to maintain the programs, continue to upgrade and renovate our facilities, and continue to strengthen security of our buildings and facilities. So today we'll be discussing the rollover budget, some of the key factors that are influencing it, talk about estimated revenues and our next steps. So a rollover budget is basically the total amount of money required to pay for the current year's programs, staffing and services at next year's prices. So it's not considering any kind of enhancements. We do include the transfer to capital because we did discuss it here. So there is an increase in that line item, and it also impacts our tax cap levy. So that's why it's included. So some of the estimated rollovers you can see. What I did here is I showed the increase for each of those categories. But then totally on the right, the share of the increase. So you can see under salaries, it's a 1.94% increase, but it accounts for 27% of our total increase. And also alarmingly, the employee benefits. That's a 6% increase, and it accounts for almost 50% of the increase that we're seeing. You also see debt service, that increased 9.75%, and that's to the energy performance contract. The borrowing for that is coming online. So it's also important to note that the debt service and a portion of the interfund transfer, that's all an exemption from our tax cap levy. And we'll discuss that more in one of our other presentations. So some of the key factors, again, as we had discussed, employee benefits are estimated to increase about 6%. This is due largely to the 9% increase in health insurance premium. So if we didn't have the 16 requirements, we would be in a lot different situation than now, because that really helped offset this large increase in health insurance. Contractual salaries and benefits account for over 73% of the increase, and also the increase in debt service, which I discussed in the others. So looking at all of this and assuming that the other revenue is staying flat, the proposed property tax levy would be 172 million. So these are all estimated figures based on what we know at the current time. So our budget to budget increase for a rollover is 3.35%. This is actually beneath, it's not a gap, where in the past we've seen, okay, we've started with a gap and we need to cut back. So this was kind of positive for us. And that's really related to the increase in state aid, as well as the growth in our property, which I'll discuss with the tax levy. So next steps are continued budget development work, budget workshops with the Board of Education, still legislative advocacy. Even though we did receive the 1% increase in foundation aid, it really isn't what the district needs. We have so much contractual expenditures, just rising rates of inflation. It's really not enough, but so we will be presenting a budget that stays within the permissible tax cap of 3.25% while enhancing programs for our students. And just some important dates to keep in mind. You have all of our budget workshops there. We'll have the budget adopted on April 14th. We'll have the public hearing on the 5th of May, and then the budget vote and school board elections on the 19th. So, are there any questions on this?
Just a quick point of clarification, when you talk about the increase, we talked about the 1% increase in foundation aid, which was, while appreciative, a little disappointing. So the bulk of the state aid comes primarily in the form of expense-based aids?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, just to clarify, is restricted in terms of how it's used or delivered.
Sure, so, and I will talk about that more when we talk about the state aid too, so.
Okay.
This foundation aid, the beauty of foundation aid is that it has 0 restrictions on it. So that's why we would always love increasing them as much as possible. Alvarez?
Just a clarifying question. It's not that important, but you made a comment with the employee benefits, the increase of the 9% for health insurance. You made a comment about the 6 retirees. 16, 16 retirees, and how like that would have been a much different number. But is there an assumption that those positions might be filled with staff at some point? So wouldn't that just be an additional cost for employee benefits either way?
Sure, so what I do is I look at the employee, what their total compensation is, and then look for replacing that employee and what that total compensation would be. So if you took the person who's retiring and subtract the person you have to hire, that gives you what we call a breakage.
Yeah, but the benefits, the healthcare benefits for a new staff member, I mean, we're still paying
Yes,
healthcare, so that 9% increase, that new rate of that 9% is gonna apply to the new staff anyways.
Yeah, the savings in the salary offset the cost of the benefits.
Potentially if we're not increasing staff though.
In other words, like if we maintain these 16 positions, the savings in the salary will offset the benefits increase that we have. We're just moving money from the salary
Yes.
code to the budget code in order to be able to pay for the
and
positions.
a lot of times when people retire, they're at a family rate. And when we hire new teachers, typically, some
It could
could
be
be
potentially.
individual rates. So that's a big savings there. So what I do is I look at historically how many people take individual health insurance, and I try to predict that way. And so it is, I think, a pretty good estimate of the savings we'll get.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's great. Anything else? All right,
Okay.
on to the next thing.
The tax cap calculation. Okay. So as you know, maybe this has been since 2012, the tax cap has come into effect 2012-13. So it's been for quite a few years. Each school district, based on their individual numbers, they have a different tax cap calculation, but the formula is consistent throughout the state. So this offers a perspective, if anybody really wants to dig into the detail, to show how we've calculated it. So we take last year's school tax, our levy, and the tax-based growth factor, this is something that the Office of Real Property Tax Services, they give to every school district on the island. So this is really the brick and mortar, any kind of development that is going on in our district. Last year, we were at 1.0117, I believe, so it was higher than this. So this year, it's 0.085, which is still some growth for our district. So what that does is we're allowed to increase our tax levy by that percentage. So if this was 0, you would be starting with just your tax levy from last year. So then we have to add into that our pilots, and then we subtract from that our exemptions, like our capital exclusions. And I'll go into what makes up this 11 million. So that's for last year. Then the 2%, that's what everybody always says, there's a 2% tax cap. This 2%, it's the lesser of CPI or 2%. So this year CPI was higher, so we have to use the 2%. And then we subtract out the pilots for the upcoming year, as well as and that gives you the tax levy limit. But then we add back in there the new exclusions for the current year, which is the 12.7. And that gives you the new maximum allowable tax levy limit for our school. So this next sheet really gives you a breakdown of last year compared to the current year. So we have, if you look at the bottom one that's in yellow, you'll see we have the debt service, energy performance contract borrowing. That has increased from the year up above by about 800,000. And that's what we discussed with the energy performance contract coming online. Then we have lease purchases, which is very similar to the prior year. This is for computers, devices, and also infrastructure we had done leasing. And then the capital expenditures. This is assuming what we're going to actually spend in the current year. And then you have to deduct building aid. So you can see our building aid increased from last year. So that's another factor. And that gives us the total capital exemptions. So for every school, obviously, this is different. So everyone has different exclusions. So this was really just some fast facts for as a point of reference, you can see the tax-based growth factor, which that's what the Office of Real Property Tax Services gives to the districts. This shows how much growth that the district itself, our assessed value. So you can see last year, it was slightly higher than the current year. And you can also see the amount of growth for 26, 27 is about 1.4 as compared to the 1.8 from last year. Then the capital exemption.
Sorry, just quick question. What's the unit here? 1.4 what? Is it money? Is it people?
It's
Is it millions dollars?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Right, so because that's getting factored into your, on the front. So the estimated capital exemptions, that has increased from what we discussed about the energy performance funding line. And then the allowable levy to levy increase. So we're slightly below where we were last year, very consistent. And even the dollar amount is about $50,000 less than last year. And this last sheet, this is a very helpful guide that if anybody likes to read before they go to sleep, they can learn all about the different tax cap information. And if there's anything anyone would like me to explain, I love this stuff, so I know Julie does too. So, are there any questions? Sure.
I don't know if I'm supposed to say this somewhere, but did enrollment decrease from last year's numbers?
Yes,
Total
it
enrollment.
has. Mhm.
What was the difference? Is that somewhere listed
That's
somewhere?
not in
I was
here.
looking at the state runs and I was like, I can't remember if it's on the state runs or not,
It's in
but.
the federal, it's in the foundation aid formula where it's.
No, I know it's
Oh,
built
okay.
in, but is there like an easy number where,
Oh, well,
did someone just tell me the percentage that it
Yeah, okay.
decreased?
So that's part of the concern with the tax cap, is there is no allowance for when we even have an increase in the number of students or the demographics of our student, like the demographic makeup. So that's one of the limitations for the, so the growth for the school is really just in our assessed value of our property.
Yeah, it's not for that, just for,
Your
just to know,
edification.
yeah, is, what
Dr.
was the
Shields,
percentage?
Dr. Shields happens to be joining us today, and while he may not be prepared to answer this question, I'm certain that if he can't answer it, he could get back
Dr.
to us.
Posse,
I certainly give you that number. if
Oh,
that's
okay, oh,
helpful to you.
Dr. Posse has
Just the
it.
percentage.
It's a very small
So
percentage.
at the last meeting, the budget factors, next year's enrollment's expected to be 5,118. This year, we're at 5,176. The enrollment's declined about 6.7% over 10 years, but we're pretty steady year over year.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Okay. Wonderful, now on to state, oh, Jessica, do you have anything?
No, this
Okay.
is very, very
Very
clear.
good.
Thank you.
Excellent, all right, state aid funds.
So there are different state aid runs. We have the executive run, which is what we're currently looking at. That's the governor's proposal. Then we will get the legislative runs. So, and those are the ones that will be enacted into law, isn't it?
Well, in March, in mid-March, they do vote, and you should be able to see some of that, but and then April 1st, which they're saying will be on time this year, will be the enacted ones, yes.
Okay. So what we're going to use and what we do for most budget cycles is we use the governor's proposal because typically it will only get better. We've never really experienced the legislature's taking away something that she's given. So just with the universal pre-K, we're not 100% sure if that is going to be as great as she says, but likely it will be. But, so I really wanted to give kind of a definition of state aid run so that you could understand it and our public could understand. I really break it into 3 different parts. You have foundation aid, you have expense-based aid, and high-cost aid. So foundation aid is really what districts use for everyday cost for a school district. And this is based off of your the wealth of the district, the number of students that we have, the attendance of those students, and also the needs of the students. If we have like ENL students or special needs students, those could weigh a little differently and generate more foundation aid. Then the expense-based aids are really based on what you've spent. So if in the current year you're doing a lot of building, you're going to get building aid. If the reports are generated and filed, you'll receive it in the next year. So it's based off of what you've spent. So on our transportation aid, we have BOCES aid and instructional material aid. That's like the hardware, software, and library aid as well. And then excess cost aid, this is for our most vulnerable students. And these are, each district has a number that is for their district a high expense. So anything over that, we would actually generate aid, additional aid for. So this little pie chart on the bottom really gives you a good picture of how much aid and how important each aid is. So when everybody is talking about foundation aid and why we want more foundation aid, you see it makes up 66% of our aid. So if you're only getting a 1% increase there, it's not really as helpful. But thank God this year we did see an increase in our aid ratios. So that really accounts for most of the increase in state aid. And so if you look under expense-based aid, it's the approved expenses multiplied by the district's aid ratio equals our aid. So every school district has a different aid ratio based on their wealth factors also. That takes into place. So not every school district receives the same amount of aid because of all of the varying components of it. So our district, if state aid is about 7 to 9% of our revenue, some schools have it as 50% or 3%, so it impacts those schools much more than it does us, but it still impacts us. So in this next slide, this really breaks down line by line the aids that we've received compared to what we budgeted for last year. So you can see again how foundation aid only increased by the 1%, so that's like $136,000. But if you look at the expense-based aids like BOCES aid, transportation aid, and building aid, those have all increased quite a bit. So compared to last year, the governor's proposal allocates only the 1%. As Julie discussed too, while we appreciate it, we are hoping that we receive more. Out of all of the schools, especially on Long Island, many of them just receive the 1%. So it is something that I know with advocacy efforts, my organization, we've asked and requested it, and our assembly people and senators are aware of it too, and they feel very similar, so.
I'll just add, I know NYSBA and Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association also has been already strongly advocating for it. And for those that don't know, on Wednesday is Advocacy Day for our school boards and those organizations, and they will be up there vocalizing this as well, so.
Yes, yeah. So if you noticed, I have two red arrows on this sheet. You see general fund and then you pre-K federal. That's really federal and state aid make up this. The reason why you separate them is because the UPK is in the form of a grant. So that's different from the general fund, which is supported by the taxpayers. A grant, we're actually reimbursed for it, so we have to spend it first. We submit claim forms to the state and they will draw down on the funding, and that's how we receive the money. So it's something that upsets a lot of business officials is when Newsday runs their report, it looks like we have all received these huge increases in aid, but this grant aid has to be spent specifically. So we cannot say, we can't really include this in our run, especially when we're looking at our tax levy, because this grant funding is not going to directly impact our tax levy. So if you do look at the universal pre-K, that increased about 63%, which is significant. And this is due to the amount per student, the allocation. She's increased it to 10,000 per pupil. So we are still waiting on final details of that and just how it's going to affect school districts. But we do believe our district and other districts do as well. But our district has always placed great value on our UPK program, and they have really subsidized quite a bit of it. But due to constraints over the last few years, we've had to pull back on that. We still do spend about $150,000 from general fund. So we're,
Not including transportation.
right, not including because that can't come out of the funding.
Correct.
But we believe the increase to 10,000, we can offset that. 150,000, we can charge it to the grant. So that'll be a savings for the general fund as well. This grant, most importantly, by 28, 29, the district has to provide universal pre-K to any parent that is requesting it for their child. So that's a big concern because you have to look at where can you do this? And do we have CBOs, those are outside organizations that kind of the money will flow through us and we would give it to them to have children in universal pre-K. One of the challenges for school districts is pre-K is 5 hours, but a lot of parents need the wraparound services, meaning prior to universal pre-K and after they need childcare. So this grant doesn't cover that. So it's something that is going to be concerned. Like we do want to have universal pre-K services for everyone, but it's still going to be a challenge for some families. And our district does do the transportation, which many school districts do not. But it was always that if you want our most vulnerable students to be here and benefit from this, it's important that transportation is included.
I'm just gonna add, I know everyone's gonna wanna talk a lot more about universal pre-K, and Kathy, I believe you shared all that is known at this time, and there's still a lot of discussion. We can ask our questions, but I think
Sure.
our more in-depth conversation may have to be at our next meeting, because I know still information is coming out about it, and there's a lot that is being advocated for it, and a lot that's trying to be understood for it, because again, as Kathy was saying, the $10,000 per student, while an increase, it is going directly to the student, cannot help with any buildings, you can't build a building with it, you can't pay for transportation with it, you can't have any flexibility with it. And historically on Long Island, that's been a real problem where if you look back, many school districts have had to leave millions of dollars on the table for universal pre-K because they don't have the facilities to house them, they don't have CBOs that are willing to work with them for the, at that time, $5,400, you know, so there are some restrictions with this, so this is definitely going to be a conversation not only in March, but I think in the coming years, especially if the 28 deadline is looming where you do have to provide it if asked.
And some of the fear too is that if the funding is pulled back, then it becomes the district's responsibility to pay for that. And if CBOs won't do it for, say, 8,000 or then the district is going to have to reimburse the other part of that. And it's just a concern because you do have students, you have a 2% tax cap. So where does that extra additional funding come from? We do not want to increase class sizes or change our program. So while it sounds good in theory, what the governor is proposing, like the universal childcare, it really impacts New York City. It doesn't impact any other.
Well, it's
part of
a
the state.
non-fully funded mandate that's coming for the rest of the state, right?
That's right, to fund their universal pre-K.
Yes, exactly.
Because they're having something called 2K.
2K, yes, for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds,
Stuff.
yes.
Does
Okay,
anybody have questions?
Yes, I would say if you have universal pre-K questions, you can
Sure,
ask
I
them
can-
here so that we can have
and then
them
I
ready
can-
for discussion and make sure we have them. I'm just saying, I don't know that we're prepared for the in-depth, and of course you can answer whatever you can answer, but.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll just mention that I completely understand the concerns and the lot of what ifs and whatnot on the topic of universal pre-K, but I think universally, there's a reason, there's a big push for such a program and the need for it, so I think that this is just one of those things that we need to figure out at some point because it is important. I do have a lot of questions. It's not so much on the numbers coming in, it's more of the restrictions that we've already been kind of updated with the funding of the reimbursement and who we reimbursing, whatever. I'm not sure next steps for pre-K discussion, so I don't want my questions here. I think it's a question of program and really the structure of the program. And this committee is specific for budget wise, we've already initiated discussions on bond and the future of that makeup and whatnot. So I think for me, really the discussion is the program part of it. What is the makeup for Port Washington's gonna look like? How do we choose as a district to fund whatever that is? So I'm just proposing to you guys, what do you feel is like the next best steps for that type of discussion? Is that a full board discussion at some point? I don't think it's budget specific. It definitely has budget
So I think,
discussions.
I may be speaking out of turn, unless do you have an answer, or do you?
An answer?
Do you wanna go first? Okay, so then, the only thing what I would recommend is, we're in a current budget year, right? So we can look at the program today as we are going to budget for it, right? So that's that conversation and how it's going to look for this year's budget. Programmatically, long-term, I think it is worthwhile. We did a deep dive a few years ago when we started in this committee, and then we brought it to the full board to look at what our UPK program would look like. That's when we were transitioning from the trailers to the in-house building, and we could provide so many more services and whatnot. So I think it would be good for us to revisit it. The issue is, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, between now and June.
It's separate, yeah.
Well, I don't know that we're making drastic changes to our program with this, other than trying to financially make it work. Maybe we're increasing enrollment, I don't know what's going to happen. Those are those conversations to have for this next coming year's budget. But if we wanna have a longer term conversation about programmatically what we wanna see, I think it's worthwhile, especially if we are going to have to do something for
I'll
2029.
clarify. I think that we as a board have been given a lot of updates in the packet as far as like funding and concerns that you and Kathy are working on. And I think for me, I just need to better understand where are we landing on everything, because I'm a little confused with the numbers on where are we landing for next year.
Okay, so then can we do in March, can we make sure that one of our presentations is a study of where are we with UPK today? And then we'll have more information on numbers for what it's going to look like for the 26-27 budget year, and what programs we provide, what transportation, how many students, what do the demographics look like, and what we're anticipating for 26-27. And can we look at, is that what you're, and how our relationships with our CBOs also work as well.
So that's what I was gonna add is, right now, we're going to have conversations with our CBOs to talk with them. Also, where would we put, say we have another 100 students that wanna participate, is there a facility where we could have these children? Like, we have to look at all of those things.
But that's a longer term
Right,
question
but
that's
it's
out there,
something
but
we
it's
still
something
have to
look at.
start, like,
Can I also
doing
just,
preliminary.
sorry to interrupt, CBOs, for those of you that are in the room, CBOs is an acronym for organizations that we work with.
Community-based
Yes, community, thank you, I always wanna say collective, and I know it's wrong, yes.
Collective.
Community-based organizations, and under the stipulation of this grant that Kathy mentioned, a school district is required to take 10% of their full grant and allocate it to a CBO. A CBO So, and if it's a per student price of $5,400, that's what it used to be, now it's gonna be $10,000. And there are some questions about how this all works, but what it basically means is that the money follows the student, right? So if you, let's just talk in the old days, $5,400 per student would follow a student and that organization would get one. For any of us who know about our local CBOs, which would be any of our preschools or childcare centers, $5,400 does not go very far within our local area, right? So there are some questions surrounding that, as well as the fact of the matter is how does this all work now with an increase per student? So I just.
And you are permitted to hold a portion of that for administrative costs for running the program, et cetera. But as we said before, transportation is not something that's reimbursable. So right now, so two things are important to note. One is that the landscape for UPK has changed from the beginning of the school year to now with this new budget run. So the question is really with this new budget run and this new formula, the $10,000 per student formula, how many students can we service through the CBOs? And so we have to go back to them and find that out. Because ideally the CBOs would not be charging tuition if it was truly universal. But right now, as you know, they are still charging tuition and they're reimbursing families with the almost like a discount, giving a discount to families. So that's something that we have to talk through with them, which is why this just is going to require more time.
I think the only thing for next year for me is just wondering, because it was already a concern before the run, so if just maybe an update at some point.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like, as a board, we really haven't had a public discussion on how, because it's one thing budget related, but it's another thing for the philosophy of the board and what we're trying to do as a district with our programs. And I don't think we've really discussed pre-K recently at all, that I've seen so far.
We haven't discussed it since you've been on the board, that is a true statement.
And even maybe the year before that. I just think it's important that we have that discussion as a board. Because, it's always this, it's great, we look at the numbers, but,
So
what do we as a board also would like to see?
So I guess but the issue, but that's why I'm suggesting a two-part conversation. So the first part would be understanding what does it look like for this year, and then ongoing conversations that I see happening throughout next year on what does the program mean to the Port Washington School District, because next year is our planning year if we are going to have to start accepting students as of 2028. Right? So we can start planning today, but I don't know that there's enough information out there. We can plan for 26, 27. We have enough information for that.
Did
But
we
that-
accept student, what's the status of pre-K now for next year's enrollment?
No, with respect to the budget for this, for right now, we were budgeting as if we had the same number
Right,
of
roll over.
students for next year, and then once we find out more information regarding the grant and what the CBOs are willing to do, then we can determine if we can expand the number of kids.
So that's why if we can talk about that more in depth in March, we'll have an
Yeah.
understanding.
I'll hold all my questions about the UPK program enhancements, expansion for those conversations, but just for the purposes of this year's budget, how much, if you know offhand, how much do we spend to supplement the UPK grant and complete the program? Like, what's that?
For in-house, our
Our in-house
yeah.
program?
It's about 150.
That was the
just for
150.
The personnel.
Okay.
The transportation is more than.
It's like 450.
So
So all in,
450,
we're
right?
looking at like 450, 500?
600,000 about.
Okay.
Yeah, plus 450
Yeah.
plus the 150.
So in terms of the increase that we're getting on this year's budget, we're really, once we look at how it offsets those costs, because we can't use this funding to pay for the transportation, but it will come from somewhere else and it will offset that cost. We're really looking at an increase of about $200,000. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, so
Grant,
so
yeah.
the
Yeah,
part
for
that's
grant.
unknown is how much how much are we allocating to the CBOs in terms of the per
Yeah,
pupil amount? We have to discuss that with them.
Yeah.
But so if we just take our 72 kids that we have in-house and we say we're now getting $10,000 per child for those 72 kids, we know that the net gain in that, we're comfortable saying that we can take the $150,000 and that right now is charged to general fund and charged to the grant. So free up $150,000 from our budget.
Right.
We're comfortable doing that right now. And then there might be some, again, if we can expand, then we can expand, and we'll get a sense of that later on.
Do we think by March 10th, I think that's our next meeting, is right before our board meeting on March 10th. Do we feel like we're gonna have time to have some of those answers and we can have this conversation? And does this committee feel that that's
Yeah.
worthwhile then
It
to have
depends
that?
on also
Oh,
the
we're March
information.
16th, we're March 16th, so we have a little more time, because we're before, yes, we're before the next meeting, so that's fine.
I guess my question then is, if I'm understanding the numbers correctly, if we were to keep enrollment stable for next year and have this grant, would that require program enhancement, because we would have to put more into do we have to put more into the program?
No, because right now, again, we're delivering a program that exceeds
The
what's required
requirements.
right now.
Yeah.
Because we're providing transportation, we're providing E&L, we're
Yeah.
providing
Yes.
different levels of push-in, things of that nature, so.
Okay. So the grant would cover those additional services above and beyond?
Not really.
Okay, I'm really trying to understand, just looking at what we
Would you
have
just not get the money
But that's
though,
why I'm
right?
saying-
Like,
but
it
that's-
just
Well,
depends.
it's the
So
same
this
number,
is-
so this figure where the increase is, that's assuming the same number of students that we currently have.
Correct.
They didn't
Okay.
project out that, so
We're gonna have
say
100
we have-
students,
Yeah,
which we've had close to 100 before, right? When we had to
Yes,
cut
when
back.
we-
We had another classroom and then we cut
in-house,
back,
yeah, but
yes.
then you have additional ones.
Then you have a
CBOs.
different, right, exactly, yes.
So there's different regulations with the universal pre-K, like you can only have 18 students
Right.
in one class, so,
And there's a teacher and an aide for all
Right.
of those, right? So I think this would be a worthwhile conversation. I think it would be helpful for us to just have this conversation as a budget committee. It's available for the board and we can take recommendations from that. If you guys want to have a programmatic conversation with the board in March, we can bring it up, right, as a
Yes.
recommendation. I do anticipate that as a board, it would be our responsible and fiscal thing to do, to continue these conversations, though next year in the budget, in the budget meeting, at least in those more in-depth situations, especially if we are going to have to grant UPK services to any parent or guardian who requests it. It should not be a one and done conversation. It should definitely be
Would
something.
that conversation be an appropriate place to also discuss the wraparound services that could potentially be required or
I think-
desired?
I don't think they'll be required just because schools, and that was a big concern for like the teacher organizations too, like they are not caregivers. That's a whole different type of kind of ball of wax because school districts are in the business of educating, not childcare. So that's why you might not have everybody say, I want universal pre-K, because they might not work for them.
Right.
If it doesn't have the wraparound services. So
But I
That's
think-
an issue now for any parent, right? That's not like a new,
No, that's not.
that's not a new unique thing for Port Washington, for the current students right now. So just because the funding, we're having these discussions of funding and the CBOs, that's an issue even for the CBOs. Because they themselves have limited hours and have to decide on themselves with wraparound and whatnot. So I don't really think, I'm not as concerned with that discussion. More to know what, as we as a district, what route are we going with? Either expanding the program, what does this look like?
Right.
Because we did get more funding, but the nature of the funding is, I think the true nature of the funding is to expand a program, not just fund
Correct.
CBOs at a higher rate.
Right.
Correct, yes.
So that's really what I would just
The
like to
problem
see as
is
an update.
the way the regulation's written, It is not allowing for true expansion, right? That's the
Or the
crux.
issue that I'm hearing is that we're delivering more than what the grant actually
Covered.
covers.
wouldn't say-
With respect to
wouldn't-
transportation, like in other words, like we can never put in for reimbursement of transportation the way that it's currently
Right.
written. So as long as we decide to provide transportation, that would come from the general
I
fund.
think for some of our OT and PT services as well that we provide, those are also additional, so again,
Let's just to
so that is
clarify, if
shouldn't
Dr.
allow
Allen was
expansion,
here,
because
those
that will
services
always be
would be provided, just to clarify, Ms. Epstein, on that
Yeah.
statement, because any of these services that we're talking students, they would be getting them at their CBOs. They'd be getting them at any preschool. Those are separate, and if we're talking about CPSE,
Yeah.
those are
Right.
not paid by the district either. So like, those are
Correct.
totally different funding, so
but we were
these
paying for-
enhancements
yeah.
that we're talking
We were
about.
paying for some services that were enhancements in our budget. So I'm sorry, you are correct.
I think that that should
that's-
just be clarified,
that
because
needs to be
then
clarified.
I don't wanna have a full board discussion where then this is gonna go into, well, what services we're giving that we don't have to give, because those aren't even paid by this
Correct.
district, so.
That was part of the conversation when we were piercing the cap that came to light, is there were services that we were providing, because we were providing them at a swifter pace than they would be able to get them at other places. So again,
Art, you might be giving art when you don't need to give art. I don't know in the
well, they were, the
pre-K,
example
I don't even know what pre-K is.
no, they were giving
building level
building
services,
level,
speech,
yes, they were
and-
giving, these were the examples that were being used. So again, I think
Yeah.
it's beneficial for us to not guess
Yes.
and to have
Yes.
a
And to
thoughtful
yes.
delivery of information that is accurate and succinct to what we deliver, to what we can deliver based under these new changes, and then we can still look forward for it as well.
And yes, and potentially to put in our parking lot of advocacy initiatives, if we are going to be expected
We
to
should-
serve a total of
Well,
potentially 500 kids.
yes, I have to tell you, I don't think it should be in a parking lot. I think that it should, UPK, again.
Well, right now, all of our advocacy is in a parking lot.
Well, that's
From what I
true,
can tell.
that's true, but
So-
right, like if we wanted to go, if we wanted to advocate for something right now, I would tell you, the two things that we could realistically advocate for are
More
when we're
foundation.
foundation aid increase, and the second thing we can say is, we are so excited for universal pre-K and we are thankful that this increase happened, but we still need clearer understanding of how this partially funded mandate is going to work and how you're going to build flexibility into the funding for, if not this year, because what we've been hearing is there might be an extra $130 million sitting in the governor's budget that they can play with for universal pre-K. So how is that money going to be allocated? Is it right? So, and how is that going to work? And that's how our advocacy work could work this year, because we don't want to wait till next year to start advocating for universal pre-K. The changes are starting now, and if they are going to continue forward, we need to make sure whatever is written into legislation is written in for us that is going to be favorable so that we can plan next year. Because unfortunately with school districts, we saw this with everything. They give you a mandate and then they tell you, wait, 2 days before school, we'll tell you what's gonna happen and how you can implement it. We should be advocating now for that advance warning, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm very passionate about advocating right now. I've been on an advocacy tour, so I'm very passionate about it.
In terms of advocacy
Yes.
For foundation aid and
Yes.
potentially advocacy on revising the foundation aid formula, which I know.
They're not gonna revise it anymore.
Well, but I know
Yes,
that's
we
what
can still-
NISBA
yes.
is
Well,
talking
if I could
about.
just, they did that Rockefeller
Yes.
Center, not center,
Institute.
the study. They should resurrect that. They shouldn't just leave it
Yes.
on
Yeah.
a shelf somewhere because they invested $2 million.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about just in terms of when we look at that $130 million and what's there, what is the historical standard for increases to foundation aid? I somehow have in the back of my head like 3%. No, like
Well, no, it used to
like
be
a
3%. It used to
3%.
be 3%,
2%
but
last
that
year.
was when it wasn't fully funded, right? So historically, when it wasn't fully funded, we were getting 2 to 3%. And in the last couple years, since it's been fully funded, we've gotten 2 to 3%. But then there was the year when the formula got changed and we received less than we were supposed to. We were supposed to get a 2% increase and we received less than a 2% increase. So it's, I would tell you there's some, I don't know that there's a clear historical path. Would you disagree that there's a clear historical path?
No, I agree, because we were never fully funded until I think like 3 years ago or
Right.
4 years ago, we started getting.
Do we have a target for our advocacy, or is it just like the best we can get, or is it based on need?
Well, I was just gonna say, so one of my questions, the 1% across the board on state runs for other districts, not everyone got the 1%, a few got 3%.
Right.
And I didn't review every single town.
460 got one and the rest got.
And the rest got
yeah.
something
So
else.
those districts with the 1% reduced enrollment, is that safe to say?
I don't know if, is it related
Not
to Save
always,
Harmless
it
or no?
wasn't, no, it
No,
wasn't.
it is, I mean, if we didn't have the Save Harmless, our
That's probably
foundation
it.
aid would.
Well, yes, I know, but-
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
do we know if everyone that got the 1% was a reduced?
No, we don't have that analysis.
Okay, so that has been my only thing last year when we went in to meet with our local reps, is
Right.
that at that time, we were reviewing numbers and it was a little bit of debate if it was decline enrollment, not decline enrollment. We obviously have a decline enrollment of 1%, which is only about 50 students. My only question was our high need students.
Right.
Do we know our numbers, if those numbers have increased on our high need students? On special education, what are those numbers? And then what are the numbers on our ELL students? I don't know how it works with the economically disadvantaged students, if that rate is a different rate that we get funding for. But I think it's really important for us to understand those numbers. We are in a different place. It's a 1% decrease. It's a little harder argument when we meet with any reps to argue for funding when it comes to state aid. But
It's
if
not
our needs,
incremental.
Correct.
If you have a decrease of 1% of your students, it doesn't mean you can let go of 20 teachers,
correct.
because you
I think-
still have a classroom full of.
When I talk about advocacy, this current route that the government has been going in the last few years with the concern a year or 2 years ago with removing hold harmless has been about enrollment. So I think with our current state, the needs is, I think, the advocacy part.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at,
So
is
we do
where our
always-
needs are, is where our discussion should really be focused, not so much what is fair and right for every district
And
in
that's, well,
in New
listen,
York.
That's what I was going.
So
Yes.
when we've advocated in the past, what we have done is brought that information to our legislatures, to all of our letters that we have written. We talk about what our enrollment, we talk about our enrollment and our numbers from year over year for ELL, special ed, and we talk about our economically disadvantaged numbers. In the past few years, our increases and decreases in those numbers have not seen dramatic swings. And I think the same, just from my quick perusal recently, it's not as dramatic, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't advocate in that manner. So I agree with that. You should always walk in with that, especially since the foundation aid formula has factors in it that it accounts for it. And if you recall, one of the things that was being advocated for under the Rockefeller Institute was that, in that study, was that the way that ELL, special ed, and economically or socioeconomic factors are taken into account under the formula are somewhat skewed and are not the most accurate. And while there was a slight tweak to aspects of that in this revision of the formula, the Institute did not have enough time to do that deep dive that really was needed, because the complexion of every school is very different, right? And there isn't necessarily one answer for all, and as you heard from all of the testimony from last year, there wasn't. And so they just did not have enough time to adequately dive into this 100-page formula. So the advocacy for the formula should still continue, and it should still include all of those different factors, and we should always bring those factors when advocating. So, sorry,
I
yeah.
think we should just know our numbers.
one-
Are we
yeah.
down 5%? Are we up 5%?
Well,
It's just a matter of the numbers.
One of the issues though too, the foundation aid formula was developed prior to the tax cap.
Correct.
So there's no release valve. If the foundation formula thinks Port Washington is wealthier and should bear more of the percentage of their tax levy, then it's saying you can only bear 2% more, which doesn't make sense because there's no release valve. So what they're saying is you're wealthy, you should take on more, but you can't, you can only take on 2%. So that's where there's a huge
That's what the
discrepancy.
argument is also that we.
So I can answer Sandra's question
Yeah,
though, so over the last 10 years ago, we had 8% of our kids were English language learners compared to 9% now. 15% of our kids were students with disabilities 10 years ago compared to 16% now.
Right.
Economically disadvantaged 10 years ago was 17% of our population, it's 22% now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important, and my question was simply, for this year, if we are going in and to talk to our elected officials, representatives, with an ask to take maybe a little bigger bite of that surplus pie, how are we, what is our case, what are we bringing, and what is our target, right? Because you could go in and say, our costs have increased 6%, this isn't keeping up with what, right, and you're
We
asking for
usually do, usually we do that.
Or you can
Yes.
go in or.
Yeah,
It's not
yes.
mutually exclusive.
Yes.
You can go in and make the case that our economically disadvantaged population has increased 5% in the last 10 years. You know, a 1% increase is not nothing on an ELL and students with
Correct.
disabilities population. So I think I would like to be clear in our advocacy as to what our target is, because I find that when you advocate for just more, it's not terribly effective.
Currently, there is no advocacy set up. It's just the one of the three members on the, whatever that thing is called. Because it was focused, the urgent need, right now for the last couple of weeks, the urgent need was on the title funds.
Right.
So there has been a pause.
So then we can bring this up as a recommendation
Correct, yeah.
tomorrow
Yes.
and ask
Yeah.
for this advocacy and share this information with them. I think I shared some of this information with Deb earlier.
Should just be refocused now.
Yes,
And there is some urgency because we're in the middle of the budget.
you have to do it
cycle.
before March.
Yeah.
So by March 15th, everyone is gonna have everything decided. So we have to
Yeah.
do this.
They're already.
And they're already doing it, which is again, if we have a letter we can get out by the 11th, we should send that up with one of our representatives to go out on the 11th while everyone is having these conversations at Advocacy Day, right? So
Thursday?
this week,
Yeah.
this Thursday, yes. But I will tell you, there are people that are advocating for at least for Long Island, the ask is for 2 to 3% increase for foundation aid. That is the specific ask going in for all of Long Island being advocated for. So from that standpoint, we are also incorporated into that as well. Okay. Anything else we should add? Okay. Do you want me to throw the UPK in there, or are we just doing foundation aid?
I think
There should be a
clarity on
discussion.
clarity.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are we good with that? Any other recommendations we're making? Not really, right? Okay, so advocacy recommendation, we'll put that in there.
I have one clarifying question.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's full board meeting is a deeper dive of what we just were shown.
No,
No,
this is the deep dive.
This is the
deep dive.
But these three presentations.
No, we're just doing we're doing the rollover
You
budget.
didn't read the packet, yeah.
No
Tax
agenda.
cap. We're doing the rollover budget and the tax cap
These ones, okay.
presentation.
And I
We're not
do
necessarily
talk
doing
about-
the deep dive into state aid.
Okay.
I do list the state aid, but we don't really.
Yeah.
We do.
Okay, now we're gonna circle back to the old business conversation that we had at the last meeting, which we were talking about the concept of revenue generators and the potential benefit of, or the potential of creating a committee charged with maybe identifying, evaluating, and recommending such revenue generators. Did I adequately capture that from one meeting to the next? Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'm going to let one of you
I didn't bring this up.
start this conversation. Well, I voted against it, so I can bring it up and I can start it. I can have it, but if one of you would like to start, what are you thinking that would be a worthwhile, if we were to, let's do this first.
Ms. Mawani, why don't you just mention what you were mentioning last
Okay.
meeting?
Okay, go ahead.
Simply, my thought was that it could be worthwhile to bring a group in the community and in the school community together to think about potential ways over the next, I don't know what time frame we want to look at, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, whatever it is, to explore new or additional revenue sources for our school district. Because what we've seen right now is that our revenue sources are pretty stable, but some of them are less stable than others, right? Like we had a boom year with entertainment contracts, and then we had a bust year with entertainment contracts, and that can materially impact our ability, not our ability to serve students, we'll maintain our program, but we could have opportunities to expand and enhance. So that was my only thought in bringing this up, that is there value in bringing the community together to, and bringing, specific members of our community together who believe they have expertise and value to add to this discussion, to think about that. We didn't get into the discussion about potential opportunities for revenue, but, and I don't think we need to get into that here or in terms of our recommendation, but I would expect they would come up in a conversation involving our community and school officials.
With your explanation now, I would be interested first on a district level of what internally our staff, really the cabinet, have seen in other districts in New York before we go to the next step of the community members. That would be really something that I would be curious to see of what that makeup looks like, because when you mentioned it briefly last meeting, my head has really just went to the CTE component of it, and not necessarily the entertainment ones and like these other maybe vendors using the facility. I'm not thinking that. Again,
I'm thinking of ones we already have. CTE would be a expansion.
that's what I thought.
Well, that is where my head was going, but
When we're talking about 3-5 years, that's where I was thinking. And not only listen, it's all great, and I think I've said it many times, it's all great that it's additional revenue. For me, it's really program. It's just an important program to look into, and just to understand what options do we have for programs for our students, and if this is an enhancement that we can offer while funding it somehow, why wouldn't we consider that, and why haven't we? Or has the district looked at already, and just maybe newer trustees haven't been updated on that? I'm not sure. So that's really what I thought when it was brought up. I'm not as not that I'm not as interested. I think it's just more important to see what the professionals already seen.
I agree.
And just get more updated on that first, as a first step for me. And I think that the next step would be then the value of maybe the community, right? Because I think it's a little dicey sometimes when we talk about a public school, and what the usage is, and community members asking for usage of a public space, where education is related. So that's really where I'd like to see, like, what if our, we have a unique cabinet, and staff, and I'm sure Dr. Graham, Mr. Graham is, I'll call you Dr. Graham. Mr. Graham, like what you have seen at other locations and where that support could be, and that's what I was thinking when you brought it up last time. Because I don't think we've done like a deep dive into that. And I was really thinking CTA. That's where I was thinking, but I'm open.
No, I agree 100%. That is a first step before you engage the broader community in any discussion. And to me, that feels like an extension of the revenue conversation that we had. It's like, here's the current picture. Here's the potential future picture, or what we had considered and why it's not viable at this time. What would be required to make the things that our administrators think would be valuable to our district viable? I think that's a reasonable conversation for us to have.
I 100% agree with the direction. So, which is what I thought we were going to do in June. Can we still do it in June, or must we be doing it during this budget season time period?
We don't need to do it in the middle of budget season.
We are not doing anything, Ms. Epstein.
Well, you all.
It is not us,
okay.
it's not a we, it is a recommendation that this.
Well, this committee, you're recommending it to this committee,
And then
in the time frame that we would like this committee to handle it.
Oh, I don't need
What's-
an update.
What sense of urgency when we right now have on the calendar in June that we're gonna talk about things like this. This is when we talk about, and we can make it now broader, that we can
Oh,
talk
so
about
like
what
the
they
deep dive would
see.
already occur in June.
Yes, it was already good. We usually do the deep dive, but we keep it at facility fees and things of that nature, but we
Right.
can expand it further to see what is done in other locations. And we can also expand it slightly further to see, and also where our limitations are. Because while I agree that it's beneficial to bring the community into it, New York State law does limit public school education or school districts from revenue generating outside of some of the traditional ways that we are already generating, right?
Yes.
And throughout the budget process, we do highlight some of our creative revenue generators that we've been doing, where we're hiring more maybe maintainers so that we can do in-house things and having more of our in-house maintenance staff do this. Having the purchase of a school bus because we're finding running our own runs is less expensive than doing, right? So we highlight some of those things, we can pile them all together in June and then see what else is out there.
Yes, and to be clear, when we talk about revenue generators, if the revenue is tuition that goes directly back into a program to fund it and make it feasible,
It has to.
right, but
Yes.
that's, to me, that would be part of a revenue generator conversation. It's not, field sponsorships and only, right? Like, there are things I imagine our district has considered that should be put on the table.
Correct.
Is June the right, as an expansion of that conversation? I don't wanna muddy the waters with like facility fees and stuff and then start talking about birthday parties on the rock wall, right?
We can't
Like,
do
I don't-
birthday parties, so it's okay, so
I'm
that's
aware.
all right, yes.
I'm aware, but like, I don't want that conversation to turn into.
I think we can do both. I think we can we should make a recommendation about our facility fees every year. And June is a good time to do it before we go into reorg, because that's where we publish them and we can do that look back. Facility fees are one of our revenue generators that does go back into our facilities, our programming, et cetera. I think we can then just take the next leap and say, let's look at it from the other perspective of what's being seen everywhere else, where are our opportunities, what are we doing, what can we be doing? And if we wanna say, what do we wanna look to 3 to 5 years, we can put some of those even career technical conversations on the table, and maybe some of those are what's gonna come up to start shaping that conversation for the committee that's gonna be established for our bond, right? Because while it's a revenue generator, you might find you need something else to be created or expanded before that period of time, right?
I think when I brought up with CT is a total separate conversation
Oh,
than,
okay.
because what I'm bringing up is really curriculum-based and program-based for our secondary level, so I would like to separate that, and I
Okay, that's
think
fine.
that is
CTE should
something I
still
would.
be included as far as career technical education is a big global, I think is, yes, but.
So
yes.
I'm gonna separately bring that up to the
Got it.
board in separate conversations.
Okay.
I think what I'm hearing from you as far as like what your original thought was from the last meeting, that I personally am okay that it's a June discussion. And I think now hearing from us, just being prepared for more questions, Mr. Brown, that will happen in June. And then we can just take the next step from there. I'm like,
Yes, I don't think there is urgency in terms of this budget cycle, and I
Great.
would
Yeah.
hate to sort of
Take people's eye off of the budget.
take people's eyes off the prize, yes.
Yes, okay, I just wanna make sure, okay, great. I think we're all hearing the same thing, yes? Fantastic. Anything else? I'm loving this, great. Thank you for that great conversation. All right, now I'm gonna turn to the community. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything that they'd like to bring up? We're all excited about the budget season, right? Yes?
This was
Excellent.
exciting.
It is, yes.
Budget presentation I've
It
heard
is,
in years.
me, myself as well, yes. Well, thank you all for attending.
For
And
now.
with that,
budget season.
stay warm and we'll see you on March 16th.